Peoples Day. Um, yeah, part of my family history is that one of my grandparents grew up on an Indian reservation in Wyoming. And I think that it's really wonderful that we're moving away from celebrating Columbus Day and moving towards celebrating the people who already lived here when us white settlers arrived. So my family is 100% European, but one of my grandparents was raised on the reservation because his aunt married a Native American man, and his aunt and uncle raised him there. So it's part of our cultural heritage, but not our ethnic heritage. So I'm planning on, I haven't done it, but this is a good reminder, I'm planning on donating money to a Native American charity today because there's still a lot of inequity, a lot of poverty on reservations. And it's very, very important to acknowledge that, especially today. And I'm just checking to make sure that this is live because I'm not seeing it on my Facebook. Okay, cool. There it is. So yeah, I'll post the one that I end up donating to. But a startling book that I read a few years ago was called Yellow Dirt, about uranium mining on the Navajo reservation, actually where my grandparents lived on that reservation for a long time. And before we started mining for uranium on this reservation in Arizona, they had really excellent health, no cases of cancer. And after we mined for uranium, which we knew was dangerous, the rates of birth defects skyrocketed, and myriad other problems, and contamination of the water, cancer rates. So it's a huge tragedy, and it's one that not a lot of people know about. So it's super important, if you can today or this month, to learn a little bit more about Indigenous peoples' history in the United States. It's pretty horrifying. I know when my grandfather passed away in 2010, I was going through some of his things at his home in New Mexico, and he had studied and worked in resource management for his career, and also for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he had a lot of books on his shelf. I don't know if they were from school. They did seem really old, about the history of treaties with Native American people in the United States. And we basically never fulfilled a single treaty. And it's really, really, really awful. So anyway, take some time today to learn a little bit, and maybe make a donation if you can, because reparations are certainly due. Yeah, it was also Mental Health Awareness Day. So I just did a post on that and all of my very strong opinions about our broken systems in the United States. So I was about to go live, and then I was like, you know what, I need to check my teeth, and I totally did have something in my teeth. So I was really glad that that's why I'm a little bit late today. Just about how I just posted it, so you can read it. It's the post like right below this video on my Facebook page. And if you're watching on YouTube, then my Facebook page is just Allison's and then CEB. Just how the United States has brainwashed a lot of us into believing that we just need to try harder and we'll feel better. And that's not the full story with mental illness and mental health. We really need systems that support families and prevent child trauma. So we need paid parental leave for both parents. We need extensive paid parental leave. We need we need literally every single thing to support parents and families and humans. We need we need companies and corporations and employers to really treat workers with dignity and respect. We really need to fund education. We really need to fund sex education and reproductive health services. We really need full health care. So when, during I think it's called Mental Health Awareness Day, is that we focus so much on the individual and what the individual needs to do to make their personal lives better, and we don't focus enough on the systems. So you can read my full rant. And hopefully, I don't know, I think it really does tie into my topic today, which is how I started off as being kind of a moderate / conservative person and thinker and voter, and then eventually became just so progressive. And so I want to outline that a little bit. And I also we also had National Coming Out Day, which I think was yesterday, and I just want to honor, I saw at least one friend post, like an official coming out post that she said she hadn't really done publicly before. And I just want to recognize all of you and who have had to or wanted to, or, whether it felt easy or hard, have come out over the years, and just let you know that I see you and I see you on your journey, and honoring that. So a little bit of history about me as a moderate conservative to progressive. I would say that the family I grew up in was like pretty moderate / conservative, probably like what you might call like a Reagan Republican. Both of my parents grew up in Montana. Normally on mental health check-ins, I usually just try to like focus on my own story, and I don't tell other people's stories like my parents, but they're pretty open about this always. So I know they're cool with it. But they grew up in Montana, where politics are pretty like bootstrappy, like just people live really far apart, and they don't want a strong government, and they just want every person for themselves. And there's nice things too, where it's like you have this sense of personal responsibility. So it's like, if someone needs something, like it's my responsibility to help. It's not the government's, right? It's like there's this idea that the government is sort of outsourcing what we as individuals need to provide. And that can be nice. I don't think it always works in practice, but that's certainly the inherited mindset that my parents inherited, and that then I grew up with. And so a lot of, not everyone, but many members of my extended family also have this mindset, right? So both my parents are from Montana. And I think it's super important to get to know ourselves and to get to know the mindsets that we inherited. I have often said that childhood is like a cult, and we need to really dissect what we inherited, what beliefs we inherited, and what's serving us and what's not serving us. So it's super important to tell your own story, your own personal political story. What did I inherit? Why do I believe the way I do? And which parts of that do I want to hold on to, and which parts do I want to let go of, right? So my parents, my mom is very fond of saying, and she will say it if she was here, that she says Republicans are people who haven't had therapy yet. And I posted that once, and I had some family members get very angry with me. And my response is sort of like, well, if that makes you mad, I just want to know, like, have you tried therapy? Like, but have you done it? Because I think that the people that get mad are the ones that haven't tried it yet. And therapy is amazing. I think everyone should try therapy. It's so good. It feels so good, and we don't have to actually be that strong, Yeah, I think that that after my parents went through a few years of therapy in the early 90s, they then became like very, very, very progressive and liberal. So they both became atheists after growing up in churches. They both decided to, they'd always had a strong commitment to volunteering, but I think they really kind of stepped it up. They both really saw that if they also could experience what it felt like to really like receive care and love, like they were experiencing in therapy, that's what they also wanted to create. And that tends to more progressive politics. And so, kind of the foundation was still there, though, for me to feel somewhat anti-government. And there was certainly still a lot of rhetoric in my household around people just need to try harder. And I really think of all of that as brainwashing now. And it really held me back. Even like 4 years ago, I had a huge meltdown. And it was because I finally realized for the first time, like it finally struck me that my substance misuse, my drug addiction when I was 19, wasn't really my fault. That when you have a certain amount of childhood trauma and stress, it leads you to a place that that can include drug addiction or other difficult life experiences. And that's the field that I work in now, adverse childhood experiences science, which shows that the more ACEs you have, adverse childhood experiences in childhood, the more at risk you are for health complications, including addiction later on in life. And so when that finally sunk in, I just really, really, really cried for a long time, because I had been blaming myself, like there was something wrong with me. And so that's part of that brainwashing of the rugged individualist, is like, well, if you can't stay off drugs, you and you're doing it wrong. So it really took me until age 31 to finally get rid of that brainwashing and see that they're really, like, everything that had led up to that point was leading me up to drug abuse. It couldn't have been my fault, but that I had been brainwashed into thinking that it was completely my fault. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a political history, because Alyssa, literally what I'm researching right now. So glad I tuned in. Yay! I'm so glad that you tuned in. That's amazing. I actually have a super strong interest in how childhood trauma relates to political beliefs. I would love to research that one day. If I ever went back to do a PhD, I feel like that's what I would want to do it in. But so I initially, when I became a voter, I registered Green Party. So I was super anti-establishment, anti-government, and just thought it was stupid. And, kind of the thing is that I just was ignorant. I just didn't know how politics worked. I remember taking AP history. I wasn't really that interested in it. I think I ended up not taking the test or getting a 1 or a 2 on it. And just, I don't know why. I just didn't feel like it was that important for me to understand how laws and policies are made and what makes our government run and why we might want one. And later I switched, and I was registered Republican because I wanted to vote for a libertarian in the primaries. And I think this was when I was living in North Carolina, and you have to be that party in order to vote in that party's primary. So I was actually a registered Republican in my early 20s. And I really joined the Ron Paul cult. So I really thought that all of his bizarre ideas made sense. The government is evil. You need to restrict the government as much as possible. I mean, his ideas are so wacky. And I really don't know exactly why that resonated for me, except for that I wasn't in a great mental space at that time. I had just gotten out of rehab. I felt susceptible to brainwashing, I guess. And I don't know if it's a conviction or just that it enhanced the brainwashing I already had about government being evil. But basically, thank God I went to college, because I got there and I still had all these ideas about how individuals just need to try harder and do more, which is kind of like the Republican creed. And I had just the most kind and wonderful instructor, Clara Nichols, who she's still been a mentor to this day. She actually wrote me a letter of recommendation for grad school, which was 10 years after I had taken her class. 10 years. I took her class in 2007. She wrote me the letter in 2017. Amazing. But I learned so much. It was a Latin American studies class. We were looking at development in Latin America. And I truly came in with really dumb beliefs, well, people in developing countries need to just stop having so many babies. If you grew up in a conservative family like I did, you'll recognize that one. And if you didn't, you'll be like, God, you guys are stupid. But this is the kind of shit that we grew up thinking. And it has nothing to do with whether or not a person can decide not to have babies. I mean, that it's so ignorant of gender power imbalances. Versus colonial power imbalances. It's so ignorant of how the world actually works, right? So it's who actually gets to decide who has kids, right? It's well, if you're in a developing country, the women don't get to decide. They have hardly any power at all. And then is there access to any sort of education related to birth control or family planning? No. And, and why not? And you have to explore colonialism and imperialism. And then you have to look at the real data, which is that as women get more educated, birth rates in countries go down. And so the real issue here is typically around gender equity and gender violence. And when you can increase education for women and girls and you can decrease violence, then you're going to see birth rates go way down. And so it has nothing to do with any one person's individual choice. And so, I don't know. This is literally like I came into adulthood like truly thinking that that the bootstrap thing was real, and it's just so wild to me. I don't know if you also grew up like that, or you're still reconciling that. Like, please do leave me a comment or send me a personal message. I want to hear about your journey. I want to be like vulnerable about that. It's like sort of embarrassing, the types of ideas that I used to have, but it's just not real. And so that class really helped, and I just kept absorbing more and more and having an open mind, and the things that I was hearing, just made a lot of sense to me. Like the more I learned about power and colonialism, it's like the less you just want to stick with the status quo and all of the different brainwashing that conservatives are pushing out. I mean, when you think about what conservative means, it means I don't want things to change, right? Progressive is like, I want things to change quickly. And conservatism is like, no, we don't want anything to change. And so whose interest is taken care of when things stay the same? Well, so that's white men who that don't want things to change. And they really are playing on the ignorance of the masses by brainwashing us all into having some of these ideas, most recently through Fox News, which is really just a propaganda machine to convince people to vote against their own best interests. And so the people in power want to keep power. And so that's how they defund education so that people can't get educated and vote against them and vote for policies that actually help them. And they vote against family planning services and they, or they brainwash us to vote against them. So, there's a great essay, What's the Matter with Kansas? Why do poor people in the United States vote against themselves, right? And it's really like kind of a cult mentality. I know a lot of you are familiar with that. So I just wanted to wrap up by talking about the mental health component of politics, right? Which is that, coming back to what my mom said about Republicans or people who haven't had therapy yet, is that when we learn how to care about ourselves and we learn that there was this thing missing, especially in the US, I can't speak for, I've only lived in a couple other countries and I can't speak too much about them, but in the United States, we do not have systems that support families, humans, children. We have punitive education, K through 12. We have, we're continuously punishing kids and telling them that they're bad. We don't let parents take parental leave. We don't let women just breastfeed in public. Almost everything about about American culture, including capitalism, is dehumanizing. And when you can get in therapy and you can go, wait, there could actually be love in my life and warmth and nurturance. And then you want that for others. So I think that a lot about U.S. culture is sort of inherently traumatized because, more prominently able to imagine is like people from Africa who are enslaved, huge, terrifying trauma. It's so terrible. Then Native Americans who were just slaughtered. But when you think about, and this is why the book My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem is so good, because he talks about how white people are also traumatized. I mean, it's traumatizing to leave your home community and come to a new place and not know anyone. That's traumatizing. And we're carrying that anger and that violence and that being ripped away from our communities. We're carrying that in our bodies. And then we're projecting that violence and we're inflicting that violence on the others. And he talks about how white cultures and communities were very violent in the Middle Ages, and we're still suffering from that legacy of historical trauma. So I highly recommend that book, My Grandmother's Hands. It's so good. But as we each heal and take care of our mental health, we will find that we would like to extend that same care and nurturance to others. So I kind of like a common thing in my household, like pre-parental therapy was kind of saying like, well, I don't want to pay for universal health care because someone else decides to smoke and I don't want to pay for them to smoke when I'm over here working out. That was like a very common thing that people in my household said. And And that's just like a common brainwashing of conservatives. And it's like, when you actually look at the data, when you have systems that don't support healthy families and children, then you have people who are at higher risk of smoking. It's not really their choice. If you grow up with trauma because your parents have to work 3 jobs, or you grew up on a reservation like my grandfather, and all the resources got pulled and everyone's super, super traumatized, and then just passing that trauma down. That grandparent of mine was a lifelong smoker and drinker. It's like, why? Well, you have to look at the systems. Look at how Native Americans were treated. He couldn't have not been a smoker and drinker. So you start to understand the systems. You start to understand that more warmth, more caring, more nurturance is possible. You start to be more progressive politically. And I'm a registered Democrat, and I don't go towards extremes anymore, because that's not what's gonna, and I don't know, you may disagree, but I'm so progressive, but it's also like, I'm voting for the party that can win. So I'm not just like discounting all politics, like, oh, let me throw my hands up and not get involved. It's like, no, I want to get involved. I typically canvass each and every election, knocking door to door. I get involved. I donate to candidates I care about. I donate to candidates who have the chance to win. And if I feel that something is not the way I want it to be, then I work to change it. So right now, I'm working for my job at ACES, statewide policy initiatives, bigger statewide programs to be trauma-informed. So I just want to encourage all of you to not just discount. I think that can be a huge sign of trauma, is just to discount the whole thing and just screw everything and it's all terrible, I'm not going to get involved. It's like, no, I'm going to work with candidates who can win, and I'm going to work on changing policies if I can, and I'm going to have my life's work be to make change and make systems that care. So anyway, I hope to inspire you to do the same, and please do, if you can, even if it's just $1 or $5 or $10, to please try and donate to an Indigenous cause. And I will post the one that I end up donating to, and to take some time to really think about and honor Indigenous people today. All right, thank you so much. Where's the end button?